I think a lot of folks on the left, they just assume that anyone who is in a position of power is corrupted by it, and like irrevocably. And I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
And also many people on the right too.
Yeah, and also the reality is that someone has to wield power. There is no other alternative. I mean, America is not an NGO. It's not a human rights organization. America is a superpower. So naturally, whoever's in charge of America is going to have to make very difficult decisions about how to use American power. And it's not always going to be pure. And the sooner we kind of come to that realization, the better. That's actually one. I was actually going to bring up Mamdani, but I didn't know if we wanted to go.
I want to talk about it.
I mean,
yeah.
I just want,
we're required now by law to talk about him twice a day.
But I mean, one thing I really liked about his victory speech was he was very explicit about this. We have to wrest power from the people who had it, and that we have to be in the halls of power. So I think there was something, and by we, I'm talking about what he was saying about the campaign and his supporters. And I actually appreciated that he's someone who has no illusions, that if you want to actually make the changes in the system that you want, you have to actually get your hands dirty. You have to be in the game. You have to be in the system. You have to be in City Hall. And he's not making apologies for that. And I think that power and morality, they're often seen as kind of opposed. And I want to find ways to think about how they can come together.
Yeah. But to follow up on Michael's thing and also to sort of like get into that idea of us as a superpower, us as a superpower was something that the American public supported from World War II until the end of the Cold War. And they're like, cool, we won, we did it, fine. We're not so interested in being a superpower anymore, as we were not at all interested in being a superpower in the 20s and the 30s, to the great chagrin of many people. But that was just for the American people. That's why this book is so interestingly timed, is that we have strong senses both on the kind of Mamdani left, if that's a thing, and I think it's not that much of a thing, but definitely on the Trump right. Like, we're done. Like the superpower era is over. We don't have the appetite for it. So if the American public is not there, and also the American public is armed with, hey, we had great intentions when we toppled Gaddafi. How'd that go? We had great intentions when we did Iraq. How did that go? We're tired of hearing about intentions. We want.
You also see it from Republicans in the almost non-response to the death of Dick Cheney, by the way. Almost complete non-response.
I went, this is a sidebar to a question. I shouldn't say it, but you just reminded me. I went on a very conservative Utah radio the other day to talk about Mamdani. They just wanted to because I'd written about him. And they prefaced it with like, oh, and in other news, Dick Cheney died today. He was a great American up until the end. And then he got so anti-Trump that I really lost his way, which is the way of them dealing with it, which I think is funny. But no, how about that part of it? Yes, we're the only superpower standing, but there isn't an appetite for this kind of sense of the U.S. being at the center of this big multilateral thing that we created. That appetite's gone.
Yeah, and I want to persuade people to change their mind on that, but I totally take your point. I mean, my argument might not be super popular now, and I just had to look back at this poll because I can't believe it's actually true. But you probably saw some people talking about this. According to Gallup, in the early 2000s, about 90% of Democrats said they were either extremely or very proud to be American.
Yes. That
That number has now dropped in 2025 to only 36% of Democrats are extremely or very proud to be American. This is real. So it's a remarkable shift over just 25 years. So I think you
presumably
see it
the first one was after 9/11.
around that time,
And
post
the
9
latest one is post Trump winning for a second time. But I'm sure the broad numbers are also going down.
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is that a lot of people, and I find this when I talk to my fellow liberals, and I'll say something like, I love America. And they'll look at me like I'm weird. Did you just use the word love to describe America? And I'm like, yes. I mean, this idea that we shouldn't love our own country.
Yeah.
It really bothers me. And maybe I'm the one who has to make this argument as a child of immigrants, as a brown person. If I was just a normal white dude, I guess people would just be like, oh, he's just a normal white dude. But I think that me and my family, I've lived also abroad for many years in the Middle East, we've seen the alternative. The alternative is autocratic rule. The alternative is brutal dictators. The alternative is not actually having freedom of expression. America is fucking awesome. And this is also, I think, what I want one of the main messages to be. Let's own that and say it and be proud of saying it. We haven't, for all of its faults, I mean, Donald Trump is in power. I think Donald Trump is terrible. But that doesn't mean America isn't great. And that shouldn't be a controversial argument.
No,
but it is.
not at all. And it's a mysterious thing to me that people think of this in such a shallow way, is that, you say for all of its faults. I mean, there's no country without faults. I can't think of one that doesn't have almost more faults than the United States in the past 100, 200 years or something. But if you just accept the faults of a country, the general bones of it, that's what we're talking about. When we say, do you love this country, in the sense that unlike England, unlike Saudi, unlike Russia, these are big countries that you don't have a First Amendment. Your freedom of speech is not secure.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump might. He might do a lot of things. There's a court there, and we'll see how this plays out. When it gets to that urgent place, we'll be the first ones talking about it here. But at the moment, all those institutions, that's what we care about, right? The mistakes that people make in foreign policy, that's going to be ad infinitum. It's never going to stop. They're going to keep making mistakes. And people want those mistakes because it gives them an identity. I mean, there were probably people in front of the White House like you in 1983 when we had our 3-day invasion of Grenada. I mean, people are motivated by this dislike of power, but I do think it's a separate thing to say that the actual structure of the country. I had this conversation last night when we were talking about Nick Fuentes and how he sees this country.
You need to have like calmer dinners, dude.
I need to have a calmer life. But I'm calmer now because I had 700 drinks during this dinner, so I'm a little.
I see the calmness written on your face.
That's calm. But this idea of a person at the table who's Jewish and whose parents were refugees was like when it was a white Christian country. And that was the idea of it when he was growing up, said, we fucking loved America as Jews because it was like, this was the safe place for us. And yeah, you get some problems here and there, anti-Semitism here and there, whatever. But what a phenomenal place to be. And he's like, that's why Jews used to be like the most patriotic people, because it was this port in this ever-roiling storm.
Always got to be exceptionalist, doesn't
it? Yeah. You got to be those. But I wanted to ask you about, you wrote a lot about identity politics in the wild kind of crazy places we went in 2019, 2020. And I was just thinking about Arthur Schlesinger's book, The Disuniting of America, that he wrote in 91. Very liberal guy, the king of American liberals. Is that something, like that kind of focus on identity, does that bring you to a place like this, to focus more on the America than on the first part of the hyphen? Of like, I'm a Nigerian American, I'm an Irish American. And Schlesinger had a big problem with that and said, this is going to end up disuniting us and just fracturing us in a kind of cultural way. And I think he was right about that. And we saw that in 2019, 20, et cetera. Is that part of the case for this?
So I actually disagree a bit. I'm very proud to say I'm Muslim American, Arab American. I think that's actually a great thing, is that we can have these hyphenated identities and not have to choose between one or another. That in France, you have to basically choose between being a practicing Muslim who's outwardly religious and being fully French. My parents didn't have to make that choice. My mom wears the headscarf, but she never felt that that was going to be an obstacle to her being fully American. And she loves this country. But
Mamdani focuses on 9/11. He says, my auntie or whatever, and who cares about that? She was fearful of wearing a headscarf, and he starts crying. It's like, he didn't say something happened to her. He said she was fearful of wearing a headscarf. And it's like, is that your takeaway from 9/11, from the way you look at America? There might be racism, because my takeaway from that is that we performed pretty well when it came to racism, Islamophobia, whatever you want to call it, after 9/11. We did an exceptional job that you wouldn't get in France, I don't think.
True, yeah. But there still were Islamophobic incidents. My mom was fearful. I remember this was something that she struggled with, not feeling confident about going out after 9/11, worrying that people would judge her. Thankfully, nothing happened to her. But I think we have to also just, even if you're not directly attacked or directly targeted, you can still feel like there was a sense after 9/11 that people were paying a lot of attention, negative attention to Muslims. Also after Donald.
Unsurprising though, right?
Yeah, unsurprising.
I mean, unsurprising. It's just like it is.
It's just a reality.
Yeah.
But I think also post Donald Trump's first election, I think my family was very concerned about that. And I don't remember if I talk about it in the book. Maybe I do briefly, but I have written about this publicly about crying the night that Trump won. It was the first and probably the last time I've cried about politics. But my brother and I around
Why
midnight,
were you so joyful?
right. But my brother and I were just like, we're not so afraid about what would happen to us. We were afraid about Mom. Because Donald Trump was obsessed about Muslims the first time around. His signature campaign issue was the Muslim ban. And we had a talk as a family about what are our backup options in case it gets really bad. And my dad is a Canadian citizen still. So we talked about how if it really comes to this, I could pursue Canadian citizenship. That's a real conversation that families had. But also what I say about that story is that my dad, the following morning, he's like, guys, chill. People voted.
Very Canadian of him. Yeah.
People voted for Trump for a reason. My dad reminded me and my brother about the faith that all of us should have in America's democratic system. If people voted for Donald Trump, they must have had legitimate reasons to do so, and we have to respect that. And that's a beautiful thing, I think, about
for Trump.
Definitely. Yeah, inshallah, we'll get the ban. We don't want any more of those people.
You know, Shadi, I approach the book and I approach conversations like this from this dispositional, maybe it's libertarian realist perspective, which is I have a dispositional skepticism of power when I think about politics and what my role in our politics ought to be. I'm thinking about constraints. I'm thinking about limits because I understand that abuses of power are easy. I understand that those noble intentions often turn into bad outcomes. Sometimes they're unintended. And I don't necessarily have a great deal of faith in the ability of my fellow Americans to make choices about what ought to happen and what not. I have a skepticism about democracy because I have a skepticism about all sorts of power. And when I think about the American project, this distinction between democracy and constitutional republic, I think is really important because it actually underscores what I find exceptional about America and worth prizing and defending. It's the fundamental commitment to certain liberties and the protection and expansion of those liberties. And to the extent I am inclined towards your position, it's because I think it happens to be the case, as you say, with like history happening, it just happens to be the case that America's dispositional proclivity towards defending individual liberty and safeguarding it is compatible with this broader value that I have to promote human thriving. And I think if we're kind of focused on that and we're safeguarding that project, that's valuable. But then I hear Mamdani's speech from some nights ago when he won the election saying there's no problem too big and no concern too small. And I think to myself, that doesn't sound like someone who is skeptical about using power at all. As you said, it sounds like someone who is desperate to wield power and desperate to wield it essentially everywhere and anywhere for whatever means. And I don't think the kind of legitimacy of the wielding of power is up to whether or not people have like good reason or noble intentions. That's insufficient. And I think that's where like I start to get concerned. And I'll go a bit further just to try to provide some context. Like I've been wrestling with a lot of this stuff. Like I think for the very long time, I would have described myself as a non-interventionist, which I don't think is particularly valuable because it just tells you what I won't do and not what I will do and what I'm willing to step out into the breach for. And I think a project like this is really valuable because you're wrestling with all your concerns while also advocating for America to be this bulwark against all of these other evils that exist in the world. And I think that, again, realistic perspective and great, but that gray area is massive. The span between isolationism and interventionism is just huge. And there's a lot of bad in between.
Yeah, and that's why constraints are important. They're essential to the American project. I mean, so let's say we don't like what one of our elected officials is doing. we have avenues of redress in a way Chinese or Russian citizens don't, and probably won't for the foreseeable future. That's really a powerful idea. We can actually constrain our own leaders, and I have to, I've wrestled with this a lot. I mean, I wrote this book sort of in the shadow of the Gaza war, which has been really like an important thing for me, kind of wondering how my country could facilitate a brutal war against the Palestinian people. I've been very vocal about that. And so I think for me, I'm wrestling. Okay, Gaza is something that we did that is a moral stain on our history. We've also done terrible things in Latin America, Asia, Africa during the Cold War when we supported right-wing dictatorships. So not in this book, I don't want to whitewash America's sins, and I'm very careful not to. I mean, I have a whole chapter on hypocrisy where I try to lay out those sins pretty systematically. And this is where I think people like Noam Chomsky were right. They were right to sort of shine a light on the bad things that we do. But I don't think that is a structural reality. We don't always have to do bad things because we can actually persuade our leaders to do different things. So on Gaza, on Israel, Palestine, I'm encouraged by the fact that a growing number of Democratic voters are asking their elected leaders to have a different policy there, to put more pressure on Israel, to suspend military assistance to Israel. That shows me that America can change because we as citizens put constraints on people who hold power.